Yeah, so the recording is in progress. We'll be working on the last section today. Let me share my screen. Okay. Yes. Um, hmm. Any questions from the previous sections if you have them? पहले वो बता दो.
No, ma'am.
No? Okay, let's begin. This is a small section, it will be over quickly. He doesn't really, is hypertext fiction possible in this section? He actually goes off on a tangent. I don't know what has been up with Landau for the past 3, 4 sections, but they are not as well written or as well conceptualized as the beginning of his essay. So since he started going on about the examples and also his essay, this chapter is not coming together as a chapter. But one thing that he'll address in this section, which he has not addressed elsewhere, is the possibility of hyper poetry. Right. So he's going to talk about whether hyper poetry is actually a better choice than hyperfiction, which is important because in a lot of lexias that we saw and in a lot of texts that we saw, there was a huge amount of poetry. So he is going to come to the conclusion that though hypertextuality is better suited for poetry, right? So hyper poetry, he is going to argue, is a better form for hypertextuality. Hyperfiction is what is going to be more popular. Right. He's going to give you this double-edged kind of conclusion, which, like the rest of his essay, is not singular, it is also plural. He's going to say that hyper poetry is what should be written in hypertextuality because both of them are very similar. He's going to make his case and you can judge for yourselves. But because hyper poetry is not being taken up by people, therefore hyper fiction and textuality will be written through hypertextuality will come to us, will be popularized through actual fictional written narratives. Right. So let's go over this. This is the conclusion of his entire essay. The first thing he's going to argue is this definition is by Robert Hoover, whom we've discussed in the middle sections. So I've highlighted this because this definition is important for you. If somebody asks you what is hypertext, this is the most comprehensive definition that you can give. Right. So hypertext fiction is narrative composed and read within a hypertextual environment that encourages branching storylines. Again, narrative composed and read within a hypertext environment means using digital technology that encourages branching storylines is multilinear, multidirectional. Now he says, is this kind of hyperfiction reality really possible? If we've been going on and on about hyperfiction for, I don't know how many, 60, 70 pages, and now is the time this guy is going to ask us whether this is possible or not. I don't know why he wrote this entire book then. But yeah, is this actually possible? Landau argues that what we have seen are fusions of digital art, digital poems, animated text as hyperpoetry or combinations of it. So he's going to say that jitne bhi examples I've discussed, they're not actually hypertext fiction. Why? Because it's I don't know. I don't understand it. He's going to make this very slight point by saying that the best examples of hyperfiction or hypertext fiction that we've discussed, Patchwork Girl or Afternoon Story, these are only to some degree actual hypertext fictions in the sense of this definition given by Coover. So he's going to take this definition as the gold standard to judge what is hypertext fiction and what is not. And he's going to tell you, and he's not going to tell you, ये वाला point I've not written here because it's not important for you, but you still need to know about it. That he's going to say that all these fictions are only marginally hypertextual. Most of them are actually just combinations of digital art or fusions of digital art. They are fusions of digital art. We can't really call them hypertext. And remember, this is again 2006. Since then, we've made a lot of progress in hypertext fiction. So maybe fiction is today, or today fiction is hypertext fiction is definitely possible. But he's talking about this 15 years ago. Then he's going to say what is the major narrative form of the digital age. So George Lucas, in the theory of the novel, is had this entire idea, which was then taken up by descriptive writers like Franco Moretti, uh, you know, So Franco Moretti and George Lucas were. So George Lucas said that every age has had its own, form, some kind of form of narrative. So, for example, the era after the restoration, that form was essay. During Elizabethan times, the form was the play, right? Pre-Elizabethan times, it was poetry, right? So every era has had their defining moments. Victorian era, it was a novel. In the modernist era, again novels and also poetry. So every era has had its own narrative, major narrative form. And in that sense, Franco Moretti came up with descriptive reading is a branch of critical theory that you can look up if you want. It's very interesting. So what it does is it takes large forms of data. So in literature, we are used to seeing the very minute possibilities of a text. We look at the minutiae. We look at very small details. But Franco Moretti proposes descriptive reading, which is looking at large batches of data to find out what the novel has been like or what other forms of theory have done for us. So he also corresponds with this by saying, so he will take, he'll make graphs out of it, he'll make trees out of it, he does a lot of good work. So he's one of his books is graphs, maps, trees. I think you can look it up if you want to. But both of them are essentially saying the same thing, that for every era you have a major narrative. What is the major narrative form of the digital information age? So according to Landau, the question is that will it be hyperfiction or will it be poetry? And again, he is going to qualify this question with his own statement: is it too soon to ask? Right. So because digital fiction in 2006 had only been in its form for say 10 years maximum. So he's thinking, is it too soon to ask? We should let it grow maybe, but then he's going to make his case anyway. So let's go on. Yeah. Now he's going to place some arguments in front of you. These arguments are going to, contribute towards his case about we are not, calling everything hypertext. So as I said, so he's going to say a lot of the things that we already discussed, they're not really hypertext, they're just combinations. So this is why he's saying that. First thing that he's saying is in the first decades of digital literature, text just consisted of moving text, and fusions of words and images were created through hyperpoetry. So it's like in the first decades, when you're trying to learn something new, you can only build on what you know already. So this is why they created fusions of words and text, and there was not a lot of innovation in these first decades. So he says the expected hyperfiction explosion has not yet taken place. Things are moving very slowly since then. Much hypertext fiction exhibits minimum hypertextuality. This is what I was talking about. A lot of the hypertext fiction that we studied actually exhibits minimum hypertextuality. These works, he says, so this is something positive he says about them, they have created an organizational superstructure. They've created a foundation for further hypertext to come and build upon that proceeds to multiple yet relatively isolated linear narratives surrounding by branching narrators and narratives. Now, this is a crucial point. He's saying here, although these narratives, although these hypertext fiction, they have created a foundation for other hypertext theorists to come and write their own hypertextual textual fictions on top of them, like in their image. So you have a movement from Joyce, then you have a movement to Patchwork Girl, then from Patchwork Girl you have a movement to Quibbling. So it's becoming more organized, it's becoming more hypertextual as and when we get farther and farther away, as and when technology develops, the way our thinking develops. But he says that the beginning, the earlier narratives only show what they have multiple narratives, they are multilinear, but all those branches, they are very isolated. So even though you want it to be like a tree where the main trunk is supplying, water and nutrients to every branch, it is not the same with hypertextuality. All these branches that hypertext fiction has tried to create, they are branches, yes, they are multiple, yes, but they are also very isolated. Okay, so this is why we are not seeing expected developments in hypermedia. This is his conjunction. You're free to disagree or agree based on your experience of the last 15 years, right? I don't know क्या हो जाता है इसको बीच में. Okay. Then he's arguing कि what can we say about these developments? The first thing is that it is too soon to take stock of this new form. This is an argument that you can't adopt anymore because you're reading this very late. The second thing that he's going to say is that writers are immersing themselves in various capacities of digital text, blending word and image, animating words, exploring game-like possibilities of the text. So this could be a stage in the development of a new literary form. So he's like, it took the novel 100 years to actually make its mark. It started with Rebecca, it started with Pamela and all, but then it developed to Joseph Andrews, then it developed to what the Bronte sisters did or what Jane Austen did, and then it came to alongside it came with Charles Dickens and Thackeray, and it is in the current form that we read the novel in now is a very different form from how the novel started out. He says ki because it took a form as quintessential as a novel, which does not have a lot of rules to follow. You just need to novella, essay. The main difference is the word limit, right? You just need to write long enough in a novel, right? So he says ki though even such a basic form as novel took a century or more to come to its present conception, and even then we're changing, we're always pushing the boundaries of fiction. So the International Booker Prize shortlist was announced a couple of days ago, and this is what they said: the things that the novels that we selected, and they've selected one essay also, those they push the boundaries of fiction, and we're still doing that 200 years later. So it's like with hypertextuality we've just discovered, we've just explored this cusp of the digital age, and there's still a lot of exploration left to do. So maybe this is why these developments are so slow and it is not going in the direction that we expected. Then he argues that maybe linearity is too hard to abandon. So again, a point where we go back to our lectures on linearity. So a lot of you were, confused and perplexed by this thing. How can we leave linearity behind? But sooner or later, you made your peace with the way that hypertext fiction is multilinear. But he says, and he said this before also, that even in multilinear narratives, we have some kind of linearity. That linearity is built into our DNA. We can't take it out. We can't throw it away because we think in a linear way. We live in a linear way. So he says that maybe linearity is too difficult to abandon, and this is why we can't do it. Next thing he says is that hypertext is not a fundamentally narrative form. It is unsuited to telling stories because hypertext cannot be remembered or repeated. Hypertext and narrative thus might not go together. This is his singular point to go on to his next argument that hypertext, hypertext platform, the platform is more suited for hyper poetry than hyperfiction. Why is he saying this? He says that hypertextuality is unsuited to telling stories because once you move on, you can't go back. You might be able to go back, 1 or 2 lexias, but you can't go back to the story. If you have a book, you can just flip through it, right? You can just flip through it. You can bookmark pages. You can note it down somewhere, right? Or you can just use the book as a reference for the book. So if you don't know a character, you might be thinking, oh, I have heard about this character a couple of pages ago. So you can go back a couple of pages. But that is not possible in hypertextuality. Hypertextuality depends on you forgetting what has been said before, depends on deleting those identities. Remember Patchwork Girl? The way he described Patchwork Girl was that the main character, the main protagonist, tries on identities, discards them, and then deletes them. That is the hallmark of hypertextuality. And he says that because we love to tell stories and we love to remember them, recall them, tell them again and again in the same way, in the same linear fashion, it is very difficult for us to leave linearity. It is very difficult for us to leave this thing about where we go back again and again, where we go back and where we repeat things, where we remember things. So this is why he says that narratives might not be suited to the hypertextual environment, and hypertext and narrative might not go together. Then he says कि we come to the next part कि maybe hyper poetry is a better suited alternative to hypertext fiction. Okay, so hypertext narrative की जगह, not sorry hypertext fiction, because hyper poetry can also be hyperfiction. It can also be fictional, right? So he says कि for the hypertext medium, the best thing, the message is hyper poetry. Now why? Why is he making that case? So this, the last point in the previous slide was about how hypertext narratives are not suited to the hypertext platform. This slide is all about why hyper poetry is a better alternative, right? Links, he says, are reified associations and the poetic mode is suited to hypertextuality. Links are what reified associations. So he calls hyperlinks and he connects them to the kind of comparisons and associations which are made in a poem. So he says that these links and these associations are actually very compatible together. They more or less function in the same way, right? So if you have this line like my love is a red red rose, so now here the association is red red rose, right? So my love is like red red rose. Why red twice? It just increases the depth of the love, intensity of the feeling is increased. If I just say my love is a red rose, it doesn't have that ring to it. My love is like a red red. It's a very separate intensity, very separate register of emotion. And this is what he's saying. This red red rose functions in the same way. It is analogical to how links function in hypertextuality. These links lead us to different places. They force us to think about different environments, force us to think about multiple associations present within a block of text, within a lexia. And this is why both of them are one and the same thing. Both of them perform the same function. Then he says that Coover के बारे में he's going to talk about, and he says that Coover is going to argue that hypertext is a poetic form. Why? Hypertext syntactically produce the same narrative disturbance which is produced by analogy, metaphor, and other figures of speech that define poetry. Again, I'm telling you the same thing. The first point that he made, links are reified associations, is the point that is going to go on and on about with different people. So Coover also says the same thing. Links and poetic devices work in the same way, so they are analogical to each other. Then he says, poetry appears, he says, in the docuverse as in the document universe of the internet. In unexpected places. So then he's going to argue here Patchwork Girl, and then Landau has himself developed this website called In Memoriam Web, and I've given this link here. I don't know why it's not blue and why it's not hyperlinked, but you can like copy it and paste it in your browser. So in Memoriam Web, so remember that he's been going on about how Tennyson. So he's been going on about how Tennyson's poetry is hypertextual even before hyperpoetry was invented or hypertextuality was invented by us. Tennyson के बारे में he's talked a lot about Tennyson. So in this on this website he gives you what would you say, like a line by line reading. I couldn't find the actual website, but this is the link that I've sent is a small description of what the website was. So you are free to go and look it up. Hypertext poets, he says, have used multiple formats as well. So because poetry has so many forms, so the villanelle, the sonnet, the limerick, you have different kinds of stanzas. If you've been preparing for NET, you would know all of this. So poetry has so many. It's short, it's long, it's lyric, it's narrative, it's epic, and similarly, hypertext fiction. Hypertext poets and hypertext fictional people, they have used multiple formats like HTML, story space, Flash, Hypercard. I've given the names here so you can use them in your answers. It just doesn't go well by saying oh, they use multiple formats. You can always give more details. He concludes that though poetry will probably dominate hypermedia, hypertext fiction still seems to have great promise. This is the thing that I told you in the first slide. Though poetry will probably dominate hypermedia, hypertext fiction still seems to have great promise in the sense that hypertext fiction जो है, it will popularize. Yeah, it will popularize things. Now coming to so you could get this line as a justification, like justify this, just do this. So you could get this, discuss this or justify this or something like that. Then we're going to come to two examples that he has discussed in length. So what I gave you right now was all the theory. Now I'm going to discuss a couple of examples. So Fast City, the link for this I've already shared after our first lecture or second lecture. And we played this game also, I think, a little bit when I was sharing my screen at that time. Now he's going to say that he's going to discuss these hypertexts. I'm just going over these points because like Patchwork Girl and Afternoon Story or Quibbling, you can use these in your answers. He says that this is a spatial hypertext by Don Bosco, and the Fast City here refers to Singapore. Okay. He says that this is a mosaic of urban life which he composed through Flash. Now, mosaic of urban life in the sense that if you read it, you will find things. So, for example, in the first one, I don't know which one, this screenshot that I've taken is, but in the first one, there is a scene about how a detective is going out to buy something. Then in another one, it's all about how a dog and a cat are fighting each other. So scenes of urban life, basically. And mosaic portraits, so mosaic, so you would also remember he's used to say a similar word for quibbling also. Right, he says the sound and text have been associated together. So there's like a background of urban sounds like dogs barking or horns or something like that, car horns. He says that Moscow effortlessly moves between Asian, American, and European scenes, and readers fiddle with the buttons, playing them multiple times, and finally begin to remember the text and sounds which is produced by them. So, text and sounds produced by these buttons, which then become their favorites, and the reader becomes a performer. So, again, this goes with his assumption. Remember, in a couple of sections ago, we learned about how games and hypertext fiction is very related to hypertext narratives are related to each other. How? Because both of them are meant to be performed and both of them are meant to be performed multiple times. So it is only when you go through these arrows multiple times, then you will find your favorite. And that is when you are going to then be a performer for the text or a player. Okay. This is the more interesting one that I found, but I couldn't find the original one, but this is interesting. It is Grey Matters by Noah Wardick Chewing. So here what happens is that they have only taken 15 images. In Don Bosco, you can see there are many arrows, right? There are many snippets of text and lectures. Here they've taken 15 images from Grey's Anatomy, which is a book that apparently doctors still read, an expose of the human body by somebody called Gray, I think. That creates a patchwork body. So this is why I was interested in Grey's Anatomy because it's very similar to what Shelley Jackson has been doing in Patchwork Girl. So she's created a composite image of women in the 18th century. In Grey's Anatomy, they create a composite image of the body using just 15 images from Grey's Anatomy. Okay, and they have a lot of text. So when you zoom into one of these organs, the text is going to come forward and you're going to be able to see it. This might not seem like a lot to us right now, but remember that this is a very old hypertext. Right, today we are very used to seeing 3D models and reading text or just rotating things on our iPads or screens, and then just everything is touchscreen, everything is rotatable, everything is 3D. But this was in 2.5D. So you could probably zoom into things, but you couldn't rotate them the way that we can. And there was some problem with the height, the depth factor had a problem. So this is just 2.5D. It creates an immersive environment of a reflexive literary representation. So Grey's Anatomy is literary, but it immerses you in that. So you can go and read about all these organs by zooming in such that the text remains stable. The text remaining stable was one of the key elements, apparently, during my research I looked up, that people tried to create 2.5D models or even 3D models, but the text wouldn't remain stable. So the text would also zoom in when you would zoom into the screen. But here the text remains stable, which is somewhat of an innovation for Grey Matters. Then I'm just going to read, yeah, from this line. Gray matters work with the information density we know from our bodies, like the story of a scar nestled among the folds of my palm. The system of zooming navigation developed for gray matters was later used in a number of zooming interface research and development. Right. This is why this is important. And that's all that we have for Yeah, that's all that we have for today. Do you have any questions about anything that I've talked about in previous classes that you don't know? I didn't understand. You want me to go over it again? No? Then we'll stop here. Thank you everyone for coming on a Sunday. Even though it was only for, I think, like 20, 25 minutes, still, Sunday is difficult. So thank you. And it was very nice teaching you. And from next week onwards, on Monday, Arjun sir is taking your class. Is he taking your class tomorrow?
Ma'am,
कोई भी बोलो.